This is Dr. Lisa Marie Bobby, and you're listening to the Love, Happiness, and Success podcast.
Well, Grace, she's gone, she's a half-written poem. She went out for cigarettes and never came home.
Beautiful song about the trials and tribulations of love. That song is called Saint Valentine. It's by Gregory Alan Isakov. If you are not familiar with his work, I would highly recommend you check it out. He is the singer-songwriter, and when I listen to his music, the only word that comes to mind is like luminous. It is just, the man's a poet, so you gotta check it out. Gregory Alan Isakov. And I thought it was a great theme for our show today, because today we're going to be talking about love, and not just any aspect of love, but what I think is oftentimes the most challenging and anxiety-provoking part of the love experience, which is connecting with someone new. The early stages of dating and meeting people and trying to figure out new relationships. And so I am so excited because today on the show, we have a couple of very special guests, not the least of which is Dr. Helen Fisher, who is one of my personal heroes. She's been on the show before, and I'm so thrilled that she's coming back today. If you are not familiar with Dr. Fisher's work, she is, basically amazing. She has done so much research in the field of love and really groundbreaking stuff. She has illuminated so much about the way people connect, the way we fall in love, the way our brains work when we are in love. She's done research into compatibility, long-term relationships, also breakups and breakup recovery, but she's also done an enormous amount of research around dating and mating behaviors, and she's here today on the show to talk about her latest batch of research that came through the latest round of Singles in America research sponsored by Match.com. Super interesting stuff. We are going to be talking about all kinds of things, from hanging out sorts of relationships to what to do with those zombie breadcrumbing ghosting situations that can drive us all crazy. So super excited about that. And then also on the show, my wonderful colleague, Marky Keelan, is going to be joining us. Marky is a gem. She and I have been working together for a while at Growing Self, and she is amazing. But one of the things that she specializes in is dating coaching. She works with a lot of people, from everything to getting their profiles whipped into shape to figuring out how to strategize those first dates and the early stages of a relationship, to really also, though, because her background is as a therapist in addition to as a life coach and dating coach, really helping people kind of dig under the surface and get a sense of, what are your patterns in relationships, and what can you do to connect with the kind of people that you want to connect and make it successful. So Marky will also be joining us today. And hey, but you know what? The show is always about you. It's not about the people I'm talking to. It's about you and your life and your concerns. And so if you have questions for the podcast on the subject of dating or relationships, or anything else for that matter, I mean, this is not just love. This is love, happiness, and success. So if there are things going on in your life personally related to your personal growth or your own wellness as a person, or your career or your sense of achievement or satisfaction, get in touch. You can track me down at growingself.com. You can also, while you're there, read some of the articles and wonderful advice on our blog. I am lucky to be part of an amazing practice, and I have so many smart people that I work with, and they are all contributing to our blog. And so there's lots of free advice on a number of different subjects there. You can also, if you have a question for me for the podcast, an upcoming episode, you can track me down on Facebook, Dr. Lisa Bobby on Facebook. Also, Twitter is a good way of getting in touch. And last but not least, if you have an inclination to leave me a voicemail that I can play on an upcoming episode of the podcast and answer your question directly, you're welcome to do that. The phone number for leaving me a voicemail is 720-443-1110. I'll play your question. I'll answer it on the air. It'll be all kinds of fun. But today we are talking about dating and relationships with Dr. Helen Fisher and Marky Keelan. Dr. Fisher, thank you so much for being here today on the show, and welcome.
I'm delighted to be with you.
My colleague Marky Keelan, thank you so much for joining me today on the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much, Lisa, for having me today.
Well, so Marky and I are so excited to talk with you about this year's batch of research that you just did for Singles in America through Match.com.
Mm-hmm. Well, we do it every year, and this is our 8th year, and we do not poll the Match members. This is not a poll of the Match.com members. It is a national representative sample of Americans based on the U.S. Census. So every year we ask over 5,000 people. We collect the data on the Internet, which is actually very good because people are more honest on the Internet than they are in person. We've got the right number of blacks, whites, Asians, Latino, gay, straight, rural, suburban, urban, every part of the country, and every age group from age 18 to 71 plus. So it really is a thumb on really the pulse of the modern singles world. And every year we ask about 200 questions. I start in August creating some of these questions with my friends at Match. And then we farm it out. They collect the data, and in the middle of December, we get all the data back. So this year, we asked a whole lot of things about, sex with robots, about politics, about first dates. But I'm most excited about what I call 3 roads to love.
Tell us about the 3 roads to love.
Well, it's... in the old days, people just went out on a date, and they invited you to go out on a date, and it was like a look-see. It didn't mean anything. But these days, the first date means something. It means that now you are beginning to be really serious about seeing if there's a real relationship there. And there are these stages before the first date. And the new one that we're talking about, people would call it hanging out. I would call it friends without benefits. Mm-hmm. And these are people they're just friends. They hang out all the time. They go do things together. They go do things in a group. But nobody has said that this is any kind of a dating relationship yet. They're just friends. There's no sex involved. They will occasionally give a kiss, and that's it. But it's very interesting because these days, singles really want to know every single thing about a partner, even before the first date. That they don't want to get into something that they can't get out of, and they want to get to know this person really well before they invest the amount of money. I mean, these days a first date can cost $200, at least in New York. If you take somebody to a nice restaurant and use an Uber and da-da-da-da. Mm-hmm. So this is one of the new paths to love. I mean, it's always been around, but I think they're defining it now as sort of hanging out. And 40% of singles this year had sort of a hanging out relationship, and 29% said that one of these relationships had turned into a long-term committed partnership. So that's one route. The second is certainly the friends with benefits, hopping into bed, sort of the one-night stand that turns into a friends with benefits, and they spend, the late evenings together, Netflix and chill, they would call it. But they don't tell friends and family, and they just see if they like each other well enough to begin anything at all. Mm-hmm. And then if they do, they'll start into, telling friends and family slowly, being seen more in public, and then slowly moving in together for a period of time before they even think about whether they want to get married. So I sort of see 3 different paths, 3 basic paths to love, 3 roads to love. Either the friends without benefits, long time getting to know each other before they do anything at all. Friends with benefits, hopping into bed and getting to know each other sexually before they get any sort of social or commitment. or the traditional first date. And that really explains quite a bit to me because, people keep moaning and saying, oh, people are having fewer first dates, they're not going out on dates anymore. They are going out on dates, but they are waiting to decide whether they like this person well enough to spend the time and the money at it. So they're still going out on dates, they're still falling in love. In fact, I call it slow love, and I think I've talked to you before about this, Lisa, about the fact that, in the past, people got married first, and then they got to know each other. These days, there's this long, what I call pre-commitment stage to a relationship, or what I would call commitment light, L-I-T-E, commitment light. This long period of getting to know somebody before they tie the knot. And Americans have thought, oh, this is reckless, you're having sex, and before you even go on a first date, and et cetera. I think it's caution. I think that singles are very serious about getting into anything, catching feelings, as they say, and that they want to get to know every single thing about a person before they walk down that aisle. So it began to occur to me, and this is where I'm so optimistic about things, it began to occur to me that, well, once you walk down the aisle, if you know what you got, you know you want what you got, and you think you can keep what you got because you've had this long pre-commitment stage of the relationship, perhaps we're going to see more good, solid marriages because people will have gotten rid of the relationships they didn't want, learned a great deal more about themselves before they tie the knot. So I did a study with Match.com of 1,100 married people, not on Match.com, of course, 1,100 married people. And I asked them a lot of questions, but one of the questions was, would you remarry the person you're currently married to? And 81% said yes. So I think these three paths to love, the friends without benefits slowly getting into it, friends with benefits slowly getting into it, are very practical, logical ways of getting to know, who you are, what you want, what you're looking for, how to handle relationships, getting rid of what doesn't work, and working on what does. I'm very optimistic about this data.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it speaks to people really slowing down and maybe being a little bit more thoughtful and more cautious before doing a cannonball into the deep end of the pool and getting really emotionally attached to somebody.
That's a great way to put it.
Well, yeah, to somebody who won't be a good life partner for them. Now,
right.
Yeah. Now, Marky, I'm curious to know, have you observed this with your dating coaching clients? People kind of, either doing that kind of slow move towards love, or maybe some people getting frustrated and wanting it to be different.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of people have been kind of organically doing the hanging out or the FWB relationship because it is something where they can observe this other person and really get to know them on a different level than maybe a strictly dating relationship. I have found frustration in people who, are going on these first dates, and there's a large commitment there, like you said, Dr. Fisher. And I think that that's a little bit hard where you are going in with a sense of commitment sometimes, and it feels like a lot of pressure. And so it takes away some of that getting to know each other on a really authentic level because they're still in the impression stages of dating. And so I do see that people who are more in a place of wanting a committed relationship and knowing that are willing to take that risk of going on that first date right off the bat and calling it a first date versus some people who are giving themselves a little bit more time to figure out what they want in a partner. And like you said, Helen, getting to know themselves really well first, also as an individual, and then being comfortable in coming into a relationship. So yeah, I'm definitely seeing this as well. And also this idea of getting as much information on your partner before committing and saying it's a relationship, I think is something that also social media really provides this new insight into who am I getting into this relationship with, and also how do they communicate? Because a lot of social media is about communicating to people that we love, but also just to the world around us. So giving us an insight into how does this person see the world? How does this person see the world around them? And how am I going to fit into that is another phase of getting into a relationship. But I'm definitely seeing this in my practice a lot.
Yeah.
That's so interesting that you say that about, social media, and I want to get into that. But I just to go back a little bit, we compared in this 8th Annual Singles in America study with Match, we actually compared what's appropriate if you are just a friend, hanging out, as opposed to on a first date. And it was so interesting that when you're just hanging out, singles think it's appropriate to pick a person up at their house, to drop them off at their house, to even have a home-cooked meal, to call on the same day, to make an arrangement for the evening, to go to a fast food restaurant, to split the bill. They think it's okay to have 3 or more drinks if you're just friends. I mean, it's a very much more relaxed thing. Whereas on the first date, you can't pick the person up at their house or drop them back at their house because that's too close. You definitely cannot have more than 2 drinks. Definitely have got to go to a decent restaurant where it's going to be a lot more money. The man should be there before the woman. That's all, and they definitely can't split the bill. I mean, it's a much more formal experience, the first date, than if you're just hanging out. And so you're going to get to know the person with this hanging out bit, quite a bit. And just like you said, Mackie, is that how you pronounce your name?
Oh, Marky.
Marky. Oh, it's a great name.
Thanks.
Just like you said, it's more relaxed. And singles, they're marrying later. I mean, they really, 50 years ago, people generally married around age 20 or 21. Now the average for a woman in America is 27, and the average for men is 29, and it's going to get higher than that. So they've got this long period of, let's say, 18 years old or even less, up to almost, age 27 or so, to get to know each other and to get to know people. So I just think it's a great step forward.
Now, I will say because I can see so many advantages to this new trend in dating. What I have also encountered just in my own practice are people, and I hate to generalize ever, but what I have found are women in particular who I think get into this kind of arrangement and they fall in love with the person that they're hanging out with. And what I have seen is that there are some women who begin to feel extremely frustrated because they would like to have, be like at least a boyfriend-girlfriend type situation. And the guy that they're dating is very non-committal, like, I'm just not in the right place, and they experience being kind of dragged along a little bit, and then ultimately end these relationships in frustration because, and on the other side, talking to many single men, there are also a lot of guys who will engage in what I kind of think of as, and this sounds so bad, and I wish there was another way to say it, but like almost placeholder relationships. Like they find a woman, and we're talking about heterosexual relationships, obviously, but they find a chick that is kind of good enough for now, and they're happy to hang out with them and go places with them and hook up with them, but they don't kind of cross that threshold into, the kind of person that I want to be with. And So I think that there can be a dark side of this for both sides too, particularly if one person.
About it, that there's a dark side. But let me just say one thing about men, because I hear an awful lot of this. Men fall in love faster than women do. They fall in love more often than women do. There's data that goes back for the last 40 years on this, but we've got a lot of data from Match.com, this Singles in America study, and the last 7 years before this year. And men fall in love faster than women do because they're so visual. They fall in love more often than women do. When they meet a woman that they do fall in love with, they want to introduce them to friends and family sooner. They want to move in sooner. Men have more intimate conversations with their wives or girlfriends than women do with their husbands or boyfriends, because women have their intimate conversations with their girlfriends. And men are 2.5 times more likely to kill themselves when a relationship is over. So excuse me very much. So it's women that are coming to your practice, and so I think you hear it from women. But I think if you were to talk to various men in practice also, you would hopefully find that this happens to men too. By the way, we ask, have you ever dated several people at the same time? And women are much more likely to be dating several men at the same time than men are to date several women at a time. So, I mean, the bottom line is, we got a real war on men going on here, and I don't want to perpetuate it. I know that's the problem, but Marky, I think you brought up something very good. I don't think it was Marky, not least of I. And that both sexes can have troubles with, nobody gets out of love alive. Nobody. I mean, we all have troubles. And with friends with benefits or friends without benefits, there's going to be, at some point, somebody's going to be more interested in the person than the other. Well, that's the way the brain works. We have a huge brain system for romantic love, and people tend to fall in love, and certainly when they are having sex together, that can really turn you on. I mean, any stimulation of the genitals will drive up the dopamine system in the brain and can push you over the threshold into falling in love. And with orgasm, there's a real flood of oxytocin and vasopressin linked with feelings of attachment. So these friends with benefits relationships are not casual. I mean, you are sizing up the other person, and you can fall in love or you can be really turned off. One thing that was really interesting is that this year with the friends with benefits relationships, we asked people, did you ever have a friends with benefits relationship that turned into a long-term committed relationship? And 45% of singles said yes. Mm-hmm. And even on the first date, we asked the question, have you ever, I don't quite remember how it was phrased, but something like, have you ever on a first date suddenly felt that this could be a long-term commitment for you? And 51% of men said yes, and I think something like 34 or 36% of women said yes. So all through this process, we're looking, we're watching, we're listening, we're parading, we're trying to size somebody up to see whether this could be something that works. And I'm not surprised that men keep women in the wings that way, but I would say that women also keep men in the wings that way.
Well, okay, and so how about this as a question? Because, I think the person, and I'm actually thinking of a couple of people in particular that I worked with who were in this kind of situation for literally a couple of years. And so, Dr. Fisher, in your experience or through your research, how long would you say it would take to kind of gain a sense of, is this going to go somewhere or probably not? Because I think the other thing that stood out to me, it was close to 70% of the respondents in your study said that they were interested in having like a real deal relationship, And so how much time would you advise somebody sort of stay in that space, and when should they pull the plug and move on?
It's so hard, and I'd really like to hear what you've got to say about this because you both are therapists, but I would say when you know it's a no-go on the other side, or when you know that this is not going to be something that is going to materialize into something more. You don't want to lead the other person on. We have only so much time in our lives. Everybody's looking for love. It's really rude to somebody to hold on to them when you know perfectly well that this is really not for you, and that you're also looking elsewhere. That I think is lacking integrity.
Yeah.
And on the other person's side, if you can't get the person, if you know what you really want out of this, and you've asked that person, and they say, well, a lot of them will say, I don't know, But if they don't know after a year, I would say I'd get out. I really would get out. But different people are different. I mean, don't forget that some people are 22 years old and they're just learning about all kinds of things, and other people are 38 and they want to have a child. And so it depends how much it takes out of you. I mean, some of these friends with benefits things don't take a lot of time, don't cost any money, and aren't ruining your social opportunities to find somebody else. And you've made it clear that together that this is just friends, and one of you is going to be moving to Australia in 3 months, that kind of thing. It's just so many contingent issues. But I do think that a time has to come when you have to, define the relationship. And are we going to move forward? Can I tell my friends and family? Can we start going to the movies with my friends? And can I hold your hand in public? And can I say we're friends on Facebook? And can we begin to use Snapchat and this, that, and the next thing? And can we begin to define this? And if the other person says no, it's time to go. It really is.
Good advice.
What do you think?
Marky, what have you seen?
Well, I think you bring up a really good point, and this actually goes back to your research, Helen. And in the dating language, I really loved that section around ghosting, zombieing, breadcrumbing, and these are things that I'm seeing in my practice a lot. So this idea of, I would consider it part of the grieving process of bargaining. And so the breadcrumbing.
Can you, Marky, before you go on, just for listeners who might not be familiar with those terms, could you take just a second and talk about what you mean by ghosting and zombieing and breadcrumbing?
Yes. So ghosting is when somebody, basically you're dating, and then all of a sudden, or maybe you're just talking, they completely cut off communication. After, it can be days, weeks, or months of consistency, and then all of a sudden they kind of disappear. So that's why the idea of they're a ghost. They're gone with the wind. And then zombieing is when a ghost comes back from the dead. And I love that you phrased it like that, even in your research, Helen. And it's funny because, it's maybe somebody that you dated, or maybe just someone you talked to that there's various different reasons why this person may be reaching out, but you're probably unsure of why they're doing this. And then breadcrumbing.
By the way, we studied that, Marky, and they are not coming back for a relationship. They're coming back for sex. They're coming back just because they've got nothing to do. They're coming back just because they want to make a friendship. But the vast majority are not coming back to form another relationship and try again. So that's something I think some of your clients should know.
Yeah.
Yes, and I think that's so important because it's so confusing when that happens. You're like, what is going on? This person is reaching back out to me, and you might still have lingering feelings for this person.
Exactly.
And it can make it really confusing on how to approach the situation. So I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I do think that clarifies some of the intention behind it. And also, with breadcrumbing, I think that's another piece that I see a lot of. I'm losing the words right now, but this idea of kind of validation with some in-between time to kind of oh, wait, does this person like me? And then shoot them a text and then validating them again so that you keep them kind of on
keep them on a string. You keep them on a string. It's so interesting. All of these terms are so great. I just love millennials. I love the fact that they are really introducing all of these new terms. I mean, I'm a boomer, I'm a baby boomer, and in my day, we did breadcrumbing. We did keep we called it stringing them along, and, we just keep them in the wings and say something nice, just enough so that they never really give up hope, et cetera. They go out looking for other people, but if you can come by, they'll take you in, et cetera, et cetera. So I just love the fact that they are defining. Everything is getting defined. And I think there's something very healthy about that. But anyway, sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, no, definitely. I completely agree. And I love that you even did regional data on this and which cities are maybe the worst at committing these crimes. And I'm originally from Los Angeles, so I was like, yeah, I can validate some of these things. But Austin, Texas was actually the one that was the most frequent, and I thought that was really interesting. So any listeners from Austin, I apologize.
What do you make of those regional differences? And just for listeners to know, so there's a much higher incidence of people zombifying themselves and coming back after some time, or breadcrumbing, and maybe not having intentions to be in a relationship, but just kind of keeping people around. What do you make of that?
Well, I mean, Austin is a very hip town. It's a very new town. I mean, it's a very hip, young music and tech. And and tech people can. I don't want to be. They're not all that way, but they can be a little narcissistic. So they don't mean to be. They're just not. Very high-tech people are not terribly good at social relations. I mean, I study personality in the brain, and people who are very expressive of the testosterone system tend to be analytical, logical, direct, decisive, tough-minded, skeptical, and very good at what we call rule-based systems, everything from math to engineering to computers to mechanics to music. And that kind of person is going to be somewhat less socially skilled. And they probably don't mean it, but that's their way of handling a bad situation, is just vanish.
That's a really great point, and I think it's much easier to ghost somebody than it is to confront, what's going on in the relationship. So I think that's completely accurate of what I'm seeing in my practice. And also, this idea of attachments, and I love both of you have talked so much about attachments in both your practice and in your research, Dr. Helen. And I was thinking about that because I think it's tough also with breadcrumbing in particular to admit to yourself that you had an attachment as well. And then having this kind of, I still talk to this person, and leaving that door open feels safer than completely committing to ending the relationship or completely committing to having that relationship. So I do think that it is something that we have to come back to ourselves and say exactly what you said, Helen. What do we want? What is it that we want in a person, in a relationship? And am I actually ready to have this in my life right now? Because what you're saying, these maybe some people that are in the tech world or even musicians that are very analytical, it doesn't necessarily mesh with the idea of some messy love that interrupts maybe our career life or our
Right.
friendships. And so really getting clear in, are you ready for a relationship? And figuring out if some of these things are, if you're ghosting, if you're zombieing, if you're breadcrumbing, what is that about? And it getting really clear on, these things are actually sometimes keeping you farther away from making that true, authentic connection with someone that might be out there that has everything that you want.
Well, it's very interesting, though. But these high-tech people, the techies who are biologically techies. When they find the right person, they can be very dedicated.
Oh, yeah.
And they will want to move in very rapidly, and they will want to be very dedicated to the person. They don't suffer fools gladly. They're not good daters. They're not good butterflies of trying this, that, and the next thing. They're not that good. But when they find the right one, they can be a wonderful partner. So,
Yeah. Well, and that's a good point. And that's also good data. If you are dating people, that if somebody's really into you, you'll be able to feel that. They will be expressing it and talking about the future with you. And I think that that's good information for people to have because of what Marky was saying, that it can be confusing, knowing what people's intentions are. But Marky, going back just a second, you were starting to say something that I thought was really important. You were talking about how even though sometimes, and I'm extrapolating here, but even though sometimes it feels safer emotionally in some ways for people to kind of maintain attachments or have a lot of people in their orbit, you said that can actually prevent somebody from establishing the kind of relationship that they really want. Can you say just a little bit more about that?
Yeah, definitely. And I think this even goes back to the idea of ghosting and this idea of not wanting to hurt someone. So I like to, with my clients especially, like to reframe that idea of allowing somebody to make a really authentic connection. So when I think it was in your TED Talk, Helen, that you mentioned people have been heartbroken, or you've been in love with someone and they have broken your heart, and someone has been in love with you and you have broken their heart. And this idea of holding on or not giving someone the let go because you don't want to face hurting them, but you're also giving them this wonderful opportunity to find love in a relationship that's authentic and not, with strings attached, or not something where you feel bad for being in this relationship with this person because you're not really in love with them. And so I think going back to your question, Lisa, this idea of breadcrumbing or sobbing or staying connected and really bargaining with that attachment of whether to break it or not holds us back from being able to recognize these other attachments in our life that could be really fulfilling. And same thing with, dating. I think it's appropriate to date multiple people at a time and to kind of play the field, but really understanding how to be aware. So I do a lot of practice in mindfulness as well. And so really getting grounded so that you can experience dates and relationships in the moment, and then to be able to also come back at the end of the night and say, how does this fit into my life? Do I have room for this relationship right now? Or am I balancing too many attachments right now so that I can't really see things in a clear light?
Yeah.
Does that
no, that's
answer your question?
An excellent point. You're saying that to have too many things going on can really cloud, almost like a busyness thing. Like if you're going in so many different directions, it can obscure your feelings, and you're helping people kind of sink down into what is my truth and what do I really need and want. Well, that's a great point.
But I put people in brain scanners, and I study the brain circuitry of romantic love.
Which I love.
You can be going out with 10 people, and all of a sudden you meet an 11th person who fits absolutely into what you're looking for, and that brain system snaps into action, and you just go for that person. So that brain system, the brain system for romantic love is like a sleeping cat. They can be awakened at any minute, and all of a sudden those 10 people that you're going out with are just history for you. You either almost don't have time to even call them up and tell them their history. You're just so trailing after somebody I do think that it can be very distracting to go out with a lot of people, and a huge time-consuming thing too. But I don't want to say that it's going to kill this possibility of falling madly in love, because the brain system for romantic, it's like the fear system. It can be, or the anger system, or the joy systems. It can be triggered at any minute, and then you'll be off to the races.
Can I ask you a question, Helen, around feeling that sense of validation from multiple different people as well? Because I do find that, so I actually work a lot with men in the tech industry. So this is really funny that we're kind of talking about that population, because I also see this sense of validation that they're getting from multiple different sources as something that can also feel really good to a person. And so when they are faced with finding that one relationship, letting go of the multiple sources of validation can be difficult. But I wanted to get
I think that's very smart. I think that's a very, very smart. I think it's a very important point. Because you can't get everything out of one person. And we live in a society in which we sort of expect it. And in a really good relationship, just like you said, you've got to be able to let those other relationships remain somehow. Get them organized so that they're not sexual, so they know you got a sweet partner and all that kind of stuff. But then give people time to really go out and, just like you said, get the validation that they had long gotten from other people. Let people have friends, give some space in your relationship for all of that.
That's a great point. Well, and I'm so glad we're having this discussion. And, another thing that I wanted to ask you about, Dr. Fisher, and because really even, since you started collecting data for this year's Single in America's research, there have been new kind of breaking news in the world and new events where I think that people are becoming more conscious than they have overtly been anyway around some of the kind of gender roles, or particularly around courtship and dating. And I'm thinking in particular of like the Me Too movement or the Time's Up movement, right, where it seems like there is a kind of shades of gray. And certainly we are not talking about sexual assault or overt, abusive kinds of situations. And there is sort of a spectrum of like kind of dating and courtship behaviors, and how at least stereotypically sometimes men can be the pursuers in new dating relationships. And I'm curious to know if you foresee anything changing around kind of cultural norms, or even kind of anxieties that people might have going into dating situations, or perhaps being more tentative or careful. Where do you think this might be going?
Oh, I think you've got it absolutely. I think we're all terrified. We're all terrified. I mean,
well, it's scary
men
stuff.
and women are terrified. It was so interesting. I went to a lecture the other night, and it's in a club, and I happened to be in the bar, and the president of the club, who I know, said, "Helen, can I buy you a glass of wine?" I said, "Well, thank you very much." And I said, "Thank you," and I put my hand on his shoulder to thank him, and then just sort of automatically slid my hand just down his back a little to thank him. And afterwards, I pulled my hand away and I said, "Oh my God, is he going to think I'm putting the make on him? Oh my God." I mean, we're all terrified. We are absolutely all terrified. And I mean, in terms of the Weinstein situation and the Me Too movement, I'm glad that men, in a position of power are beginning to get some awareness that this could take them out, and that's good. Mm-hmm. But it's also terrifying all of us little people. I mean, dating is difficult to begin with. These days we don't know what people's attitudes are. I've seen men walking with me towards a door, and I can see they don't know whether to open the door for me, which is being a gentleman in the past, or not opening the door because they would be insulting me because I might be a feminist. So we are in a stage of tremendous change, and along with that, you don't know the basic values of the person that you're going to go out with, and you want to do the right thing, but you don't know what the right thing is anymore. And at a time of such change, it just like you said, it's high anxiety. Dating is high anxiety enough. I mean, what you're looking for is life's greatest prize, which is a mating partner, a marriage partner, and somebody to send your DNA on with towards eternity. So dating in itself can be extremely stressful. And then we add to it this almost terror of not knowing what to do. I was in a restaurant last night, and there was this giant guy standing right behind our table, and he all of a sudden said to me, he said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm just so sorry." I said, "Why? And he said, "Oh, I was leaning in towards you." And I said, "Geez, I didn't know you were there." But he was in a panic for this,
poor guy.
And then we got into a wonderful conversation about it, and I never told him that I study love or anything. But I mean, these are two incidents within the last week. In my life, and I'm an older woman. Now, what about all you people who are young and looking for love and out there trying to date and not knowing really a clue on how to behave? And so you just do your best and you apologize if you made a mistake, and people try to tell you what they need. That's the best I can come up with.
Yeah. That's great advice, Dr. Fisher, because I do, like I said, I work with a lot of men, and this is a question of, I don't want to make a compliment, and that was actually one of the number one things to do on a first date is to compliment a person's appearance.
Yes.
And, there's a question of, am I sexualizing this person? I don't want them to feel offended. And, but I loved your research on basic kind of do's and don'ts of first dates.
Men want to be complimented. 85% of men want to be complimented. They want to be touched. They want to be touched on the hand, on the arm, and on the leg in a social way, but they want to be touched. And they want you to ask them some questions as opposed to them constantly asking you all the questions. So it's very interesting that you brought that up, because that made me, Helen Fisher, feel better. Oh, I can compliment a man. Oh, I can touch him on the shoulder. Oh, I didn't offend that guy when I slid my hand down part of his back. I mean, we just need to know what the rules are. And most of them must be happy to follow them when we know what they are.
Exactly. And I think what I gathered also from what women want on dates is to be attentive to them, to be aware of what's going on for them. And what they don't want is somebody who's self-centered. And I think that's really goes back to connection. If we operate through a lens of fear, we're going to be disconnected. We're not going to get to know this person, and it's going to feel really scary for us. But if we operate from a place of authentic connection and being aware of this other person in time and space, I think that we can navigate these waters in a safe way that feels good for us, and also a way for us to kind of let down some of these, like you mentioned, maybe the man who's wondering, do I open this door or not? Well, what is your intention behind opening this door? And just authentically investigating. And so if this person questions you about it, you can have an answer, rather than, stopping the conversation. And even some of the political research you've done on dating, like that idea of really wanting to understand what this person is about is the majority of the population.
Mm-hmm.
Right. As a matter of fact, singles really want to know who you voted for, but they don't
Yes.
dare ask. And I suppose, if you should let them know, because they don't dare ask. But it's very interesting. I love this stuff on our politics this year because, we asked the same questions 2 years ago in 2015. So we can compare singles' attitudes about politics before Trump won and after Trump won. And what's really interesting is 2 years later, singles are much more lenient. If you watch the news, any news, you're going to think this country is completely polarized.
Mm-hmm.
But as it turns out, singles, which is 1/3 of the population these days, is more lenient than they were 2 years ago. When they asked, 72% of men and 71% of women would date somebody from the other side of the aisle. Only 10% of singles said that they would not date a Republican, and only 5% said that they would not date a Democrat. And when we asked, well, how do you cope with different views if they've got a different view? 45% of singles would, quote, try to understand the other person's perspective. Mm-hmm. 27% would try and change the subject, and another about 40% would just politely disagree. So it's interesting that singles are... I love Trump's politics. They're more interested in finding somebody to love, and they're gonna be willing to find somebody from the other side of the aisle. And people have asked me, well, why is this? I mean, the simple answer is, well, everybody's sick of politics, and then they're just gonna just try and forget it. But I don't think they're sick of politics because you walk down the street, that's what everybody's talking about. So what I actually think is happening is. With all of our conversation with politics, we're beginning to see that not all Republicans want to build a wall. Not all Republicans are against immigration. Not all Republicans voted for Trump. Not all Democrats are interested in trigger warnings and safe spaces in colleges, et cetera, et cetera. So it's becoming more nuanced. I think singles are beginning to see, just because he's a Republican doesn't mean he's a bad person. Just because she's a Democrat doesn't mean that she's a outraging whatever. And so they're beginning to see people more as individuals and trying to get to know who they are beyond their politics. I think that's a great step forward.
Yeah. Well, and what a positive and reassuring and hopeful note for us to end on is that there's a lot of flexibility. And Dr. Fisher, like what you were saying, if it's the right person, there is tolerance and there is openness because love trumps hate, and really being able to trust in the systems inside of yourself that when you meet the right person, it can all come together.
Yes, we're built for it.
No, that's
we're built
wonderful.
for love.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today on the podcast, both of you. So Dr. Helen Fisher, if you would like to learn more about her work, well, first of all, you can Google her, and there are a zillion things of Dr. Fisher's to check out, including TED Talks, books, of all of her research. This year's Singles in America research is available at singlesinamerica.com if you'd like to get the nitty-gritty on all the numbers and all the details. Dr. Fisher, is there another place for people to find you if they want to learn more about you and your work?
I'd love it if they took a look at my most recent book, Anatomy of Love, second edition.
Okay.
Or they could go to either my website, which is helenfisher.com, or a website I did with my brain scanning partner, which is theanatomyoflove.com.
Now, and we use your ideas all the time in our practice. That is amazing research. Would encourage anybody to check that out. It gives you a lot of clarity about what's happening in your relationship. And also, Marky Keelan, thank you so much for joining me today. It was really a joy to talk with you. And if you guys would like to learn more about Marky, you can check out her bio and her practice, of course, at growingself.com. So thank you both of, yeah.
Yeah, thank you
very
so much.
And happy Valentine's Day.
Oh,
Thank you.
Now I circle the bars on the promenade, while the girls in the glass, they just throwing me shade. And I'm saving my coins up for jingle and jangle.